You're talking to a person
Yes,
who had the back surgery.
Oh.
My brother had back surgery.
Wow.
What he and I couldn't tell you what he had. I know it wasn't fusion, because that's what he was afraid of doing. But
I woke up one morning, and this was 3 months after I had retired. Woke up one morning, I was in so much pain, I didn't know
wow.
what the hell to do. So, of course, I went to Leahy, and they told me what I had to do.
That's the whole thing scares me and makes me a little sick. So unless you want to be embarrassed on TV, I would suggest we try talking about something else.
Will not talk about that. No, but I am going to congratulate Burlington.
Okay. Why don't you open up the show?
Well, I
don't see
They don't-
No,
that,
you
so I
can-
don't think
they-
we're
you can
on
say
now.
hello.
They don't have a light on there. I mean, they don't have. They should have.
Hey guys, you're live.
Oh,
Hey guys, you're live.
okay, thank you.
Can you? What did he say?
We're live. We are on.
Okay.
Apologies to everybody. We didn't realize we were live, and we're just catching up on each other's lives. Margaret wanted to say something.
Yes, I do. I am happy to say that February 28th, today, Burlington received their 220 years of being a town of Burlington. And I'm very happy to hear that and understand that, because as a resident who came to Burlington in 1974, I am pleased with what I have received from Burlington. So congratulations, Burlington, for having 220 years. Have more than 220 more.
Well, I oddly enough, I was talking yesterday to somebody about my experience in coming to Burlington. We were here Memorial Day of 1972. We moved in for all the wrong reasons, but it worked out fantastic for us.
Good.
So I say thank you to Burlington as well.
Good, good.
We weren't asking you to tune in tonight just to talk about how wonderful Burlington is, although that would be a nice topic, I guess. But we were going to talk about immigration. Last month we were talking somewhat similarly about immigration, but this month I think we want to talk a little bit different, not so much about immigration itself, but upon how immigration is affecting not only America,
Yes.
but the whole world. There's certainly the whole Western world, and to some extent Asia as well. Up until, I don't know, a few years back, the idea that at least the West was built on the concept of a liberal view of the world. You help people, you were inclusive, everybody was hopefully able to contribute in their own way. And in large measure, I personally, Robert Krieg, think, the idea of this mass immigration that's been happening throughout the West, or certainly throughout Europe and North America, has changed people's views about what country is, what your responsibilities as a citizen of the country are. And good, bad, or indifferent, it's real. The populist idea, at least in America and Western Europe, that if you're a citizen of the country, you look, sound, and act and believe a given way, like pretty much everybody else in the country. And when people come in from the outside, if they're not looking, acting, speaking, believing the same stuff, then they're others. And you don't have the same responsibility that you might have if you were a citizen of your country. So I was wanting to at least start talking about that, and then maybe talk about how governments throughout Europe and North America are dealing
Yeah.
with what's happening.
Yes, and before we start talking about what the other countries, how the other countries are dealing, I think I've said before that the persons that I have the most empathy for are children who has been brought to this country as young children, not knowing the country that they came from, and really becoming a part of this country, learning English, attending school, and believing that they are citizens. And then some years later, they're told that they are not citizens, they are immigrants, and they have to go back to a country that they do not know. And that part, for me, is not the best way that things are being conducted here.
Well, before I say anything else, I think also I also should give a shout out to Burlington. I have been a resident. We have been residents of Burlington since the 1990s, so
Nice.
long time. Mm-hmm. And so we have enjoyed living in Burlington, and it has been great.
Yes.
Now, about immigration, I was going to say this as far as when you look at historically and evolution of human species, people have been moving after looking for food and better opportunities for millennia, actually. That's how we now know that how humans originated from Africa and moved into Europe and Asia and all over the world. And in fact, what is also remarkable, not only did the humans go along the land masses, but also cross the oceans, way back when there was not much technology available. But what that has provided is an ability of the humans to kind of keep themselves in a group together and live in a place where they felt comfortable. But what has also happened over time is that, given that population has increased, people have started moving around beyond the boundaries they knew, and that is where people have sought out other countries than the places where they were born or grew up, and to look for newer opportunities given the newer mechanisms of transportation and movement. And naturally, that has also, at the same time, what has also evolved is the modern view of nationhood, which was not there a long time ago, and gradually it has evolved into separate communities, separate nations. And that's how I look at it.
I think nationhood is new only because early on, the unit family was probably the first group.
Yes.
And it moved and took care of each other, and maybe the extended family, cousins, etc., would be adopted in. The idea of a nation where people feel a kinship when they may never have met each other, their grandparents may never have met, is a very, very, I think it's relatively recent, although if you go back to biblical times and before, there were nations. Egypt was a nation.
Yes, I mean, you have
Babylon.
You have the concept of nations and tribes who banded together, who fought against another tribe as one, so to invade, to conquer.
Or maybe they were conquered
or they were conquered.
And the deal was you get to live, but you help me.
Yes.
Now my question
Yeah.
has been, why did this start fairly recently, where the immigrants that come over are not welcome and made a part of our system? I tell you that I see all different kinds of people when I travel the world, and I've traveled many places, and they see me, a black person, and they are coming up welcoming to their country, places like Denmark, Norway, and many places like that. But I'm reading in the newspapers now that many of these countries suddenly are similar to us. We don't want immigrants to come in, and I have a hard time trying to determine what went wrong.
I disagree with your premise. The United States, which I know more about than most anywhere else, has never, over an extended period of time, been a welcoming place. After the Revolution, there was a strong movement in the colonies to ban Germans from coming in, because the Hessians were, we were fighting against the Hessians. We invited, the Irish came in the 1840s, and they tried to ban them. There wasn't any way to do it, but they did what they could to make them unwelcome, to keep them out of polite society. The Chinese were imported to come to the United States and build the Union Pacific portion of the Transcontinental Railroad. And as soon as it was done, we passed the Asian Exclusion Act, is I think the name of it, to get them out. Not to keep them out, to get the ones here out. In the 1880s, 90s, and 1900s, Eastern and Southern Europeans, they were trying everything they could to keep them, the Italians and the Jews and the Russians and the Poles, keep them out of the country. In 1920, they finally passed an act which said the way America was right at that moment was the way they wanted to keep it. And so you could only get immigrants to the extent that the country already was. So if Italians were 3% of the population, only 3% could come in as immigrants in the future. It didn't work, but that was the goal.
That was a country-based quotas.
Yes. And it wasn't until, I don't know, the 50s, 60s.
Actually, that's what the last time I mentioned that. But countrywide quota was there, but that also excluded people who still did not look like when the act was passed. It was only in the 60s when the civil rights movement came through. That's why I said last time it's because Martin Luther King came around. That changed the concept even for immigration. And that allowed people from other countries also to come in. That changed the demographics in the country.
Well, you also had the anti-communist movement. The Cubans.
Well, that was the other part of that.
Were a mass migration for a period of time, and for a while, if you were Cuban and you wanted to get away from Castro, come on in.
Well, there were no quotas for that. They just came in.
Right, but then they changed the rules, and this wet foot, dry foot kind of thing. If you made it to our shores, you're welcome.
Yes.
If they caught you before you got to the shore, you had to go back. So even during that period, there was a reaction.
Now, the immigrants are really not taking jobs from us, the Americans.
Certainly not the...
No,
not
because
the,
they get the lower level job that no one else want, and they continue to work that until they start developing themselves. And the way they start develop them themselves is they learn the English, and then they decide that there are other jobs that they could take a look at.
And they get
What-
some education,
yeah,
and the kids, the older ones may or may not advance, but the kids fairly quickly
Yes,
become Americans. Admittedly, they might have an accent,
yes.
they might eat different foods, but they become integrated. My grandmother learned English from my mother when my mother was learning English in school. Her father learned English earlier because he was working. He was working outside of the block in which they lived, and this was typical.
And your people came from where?
All over Eastern Europe.
Okay.
Each grandparent came from a different part of the area. So this was the typical experience. Now, some people, once they got an education, left, and others stayed. You can look at the North End. The
Yes.
North End is Italian. It wasn't always Italian, but for, I don't know, 60, 70 years, whatever, it became Italian.
But it was not Italian before.
Not initially. It was a Jewish
It was
community at one
Jewish-
point.
Jewish area.
And there were other
Yes.
groups that would come through, and then they would move out. But you'll find that some people just never leave. Either they can't, or they're happy, or whatever it is. But the vast majority move on to other areas.
Well, in this sense, you have to think about United States as in a unique way, because United States has is built on immigration, and you always get the new blood in to infuse the country to provide innovation.
Yes.
And in that sense, United States stands differently in comparison to Europe. For example, Europe had take the example of France. France had colonies in Africa.
Yes.
And they used to get people coming from Algeria and other places, and they would come in and they would live in places that were essentially secluded colonies, and they continue to do that, and they never assimilated. And gradually, I think, from my understanding, is they never assimilated in the same way an immigrant in the United States assimilates, as Bob pointed out. That gradually, as you pointed out too, gradually there is a desire and a thrust in the United States to assimilate in a way that makes the newer generation, if not the first generation, to be mainstream, to follow whatever is happening in the United States as a culture, as a cultural reference to the whole community. And I think that is healthier.
And are we also doing that today?
Yes.
Less so now than we did. When I was growing up in the 50s, I was the newcomer, in part because we lived outside of our little communities that you were referencing. But they existed. I mean, the North End
Yes,
was Italian for a long, long time. Trying to.
I mean, you look at
Yeah.
South Boston. South Boston was
Right.
Irish, and I remember.
Yes.
Well, I don't know whether I should say this. In the 70s, it was kind of difficult place to go, being a person who didn't look like that.
Yes.
And people used to tell me, well, you know, I had friends who lived in South Boston, worked in the lab where I worked. They said, you know, the best thing is we were born there, but we just get the hell out of there, because it's not a place to live, because you don't want. But at the same time, I have had friends, co-workers from South Boston, well placed, and they would say, you know, the best thing is you need to have people who just look like you themselves. That is what their ideal was. And it was amazing. They were working alongside in the same bench, and they were saying these things, and they were not just the coal mine workers. They were highly educated, people.
Keep in mind in
giving
the
that-
70s.
Yeah, that was 70s. That was what I'm saying. That was
with the
70s.
busing
Yes, it wa-
issue that came up, it changed a lot of attitudes.
Yes, that I realized that
Yeah.
because that's what I was able to soak in, that what America is about. But at the same time, I saw other side at the same time what America could be and is.
Yeah, and part of this ideal of America was there was so much space.
Yes.
So much space that you came in and if you could go someplace and essentially start your own community. German immigrants went to the upper Midwest. Swedes and others went there, and they essentially started their own little countries and then gradually assimilated with the rest. Jews primarily in the Northeast, but
And
occasionally...
they tried to keep blacks in the South to do the labor, the cotton, and that kind of thing. So they tried to keep them in the South.
Well, actually, when the country first started, black slaves were everywhere. If you read The Crucible, the first witch was a black slave.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Wow. Actually, recently there was a.
Who put that together?
But I mean, and I don't know historically whether that was true, but in the play, that's where it started.
Wow.
So that in Puritan Massachusetts, there was slavery, and it was primarily black. I don't know that it was totally black. Certainly, the Indians, the North American Indians, were slaves in many cases.
I was kind of fascinated. There was a documentary recently about Rockport, I think,
Okay.
where there was a woman. Her name is Brown, I think. She wrote a book called Our Nig.
Our
Our Nig. That is
Oh, my.
That's the title of the book. She is a black woman.
A black woman wrote that
Yes.
book? Okay.
She
I
wrote
was-
that when she was a slave.
when she was a slave. Okay.
And she was a slave when she was only very young, and the family that owned her, they were used to call her our nig, and she wrote a book based on that. And she has, I have not read the book, I only watched the documentary about how that book made the town, because some town historian dug it up, aware of how there was they used to have African cemetery.
Yes.
And African cemetery was the place where they buried all the Africans. And what was so sad is that because it was African cemetery, they had the license to dig up and make roads on top of it. And
Okay.
and they laid sewer lines along it. And which was, I mean, it's
Yes.
sad. And it was a historical thing to watch. Wow. And then because of the current awareness a few years ago, the town decided, you know what, maybe where it says African cemetery, maybe we ought to pay attention. And there was a black woman there who made, whose effort went into creating a commission, who then actually they dug up a portion of the area and then dug up a few of those coffins and redesigned the whole area, redesigned the road into a park, and they got a black artist who designed the whole thing, and they dedicated the park now into black history thing.
Where was this?
This is in Rockport.
Rockport.
Rockport, I think it's Rockport. right in New Hampshire.
Yes.
And what was fascinating at the same time, while that was happening, what I also learned is that although you could actually get you could educate yourself as a black person in New Hampshire. This was in New Hampshire.
Rockport's, Massachusetts.
No,
If it's the one I'm thinking of. There
yeah,
may
that's
be
what
one
I
in
was
New
wondering. Is
Hampshire.
it Portsmouth, New Hampshire, or is it Rockport?
Oh,
One of
okay.
the two.
One of
Okay.
the two. Okay.
But what was fascinating is that what you just pointed out, that you could get educated there. You could go to University of New Hampshire and get actually one of the first graduates. They have a plaque on her name, in the university, and she got educated, but she couldn't get a job. She was qualified as a teacher, she was told, go south.
Yes.
And she became a teacher in Atlanta. And so that was, it was interesting, that brought up how you could actually be in New England, what you pointed out, Puritan New England, and be in this so-called abolitionist atmosphere, but there would be same families would have slaves.
But that's
Well, some
true.
of it is just dehumanization. We have it today. In North Dakota, because of the fracking, there's a lot of
Yes.
oil, and they were trying to get a pipeline,
Yes.
not only from there, but Alberta and other places in Canada. And some of the areas were, to save money, the pipeline companies wanted to go through North American Indian tribal areas,
Yes.
including cemeteries. They wouldn't go through a white cemetery, but the Indians, yeah,
They're not people.
yeah. I think in large measure that's part of the problem, the dehumanization. We're talking a little bit about immigration, etc. What I'd like to talk about next, if we can, is what we're trying to do to protect our country from these hordes that are coming through, the quote illegals coming in through the southern border, which, by the way, let me point out, they are not illegal.
No.
U.S. law says if you come into the country and ask for asylum, I keep saying amnesty, but it's asylum, America is required to consider your case.
Yes.
You're not
Yes.
illegal.
Yes.
You're undocumented. You may get sent back, but
Yes.
they are required to at least consider your case. So the people coming across, these hordes, these caravans of horrible people, actually, it's legal. It's part of the U.S. legal code. And the only illegal action is putting them in jail for doing a legal act.
Yes, and we're talking about the southern border, but all across different country, people are coming in, and they are not handled the same sort of way that the southern border people are.
Some yes, some no. The vast majority of undocumented people, illegal people, are people who overstayed their visa.
I mean, that is the major item.
Yeah, but they are given an opportunity to meet with someone to say what has gone on and to get something extended. Whereas in the southern border, we just still want to put up that wall.
But what I see is that if we really are concerned about so-called hordes, United States should actually we have the American Organization of American States. They all together could tackle this problem, the so-called problem, in a more humane manner by looking at why are people essentially running away from where they were born. They are not running away essentially only because of economic opportunity in the United States. They are running away because there are wars happening. There are drug lords running around, and that I think is the major problem, and most of the drug wars are happening because United States provides a very lucrative market for the drugs. So it's kind of looking at the problem at the root cause rather than dealing with the symptoms. So unless we deal with it in that holistic manner, I think we will always have this problem, no matter how high the wall is.
I developed this morning
Oh,
a solution to the problem.
Oh,
Okay.
you have a solution.
I have a solution.
Okay,
Okay.
let's hear
Okay.
that.
Let's start with a historical background. For many, many years, Mexican nationals would come over the border for economic opportunity. And we provided them with the opportunity to pick crops and do other jobs. And then Obama said, let's provide opportunity in people's home areas. And that's where NAFTA came from. We made it possible for factories to be built in Mexico, for people to stay home and have a decent job. And amazingly enough, one of the net results were that not only were there fewer Mexicans coming over the border, but many of the Mexicans that were already here started going home. This gives us an idea that if we improve conditions in somebody's home, they're less likely to want to leave. Now, today, Mexicans are not the ones coming over.
No.
It is people further south.
further south, yes.
And they're coming over in part because of illegal, not legal, but wars and crime, etc. But they're also coming because they're not getting basic services.
I mean, they need
The countries themselves, the governments of the countries are not providing, for a variety of reasons, not all of which are crime or graft. In some cases, it's just they don't have the money. If we could ensure in some way, and I'm not quite sure how to do that, the social services necessary for people to be able to stay at home, have the garbage picked up, have decent running water, have some protection from crime, etc., a lot of these people would not come. And it might turn out to be cheaper than building a wall with a big T on it.
Yes.
By the way, I have to tell you one thing. I heard the other day that at one point they replaced a piece of the existing border wall with something new. And somebody came down, I think it's Mike Pence, but I'm not sure of that, and put a big T up
Wow.
on the new wall.
Trump wall.
Trump wall.
Wow.
We have a Hadrian's Wall
I see.
in England, and I will understand why Trump wants this wall.
Did Hadrian's wall actually work? It
Tell
just
you the truth,
it's only that big.
Well, it was a little bigger than
It's a
that.
little bigger than that, but
I don't know. I wasn't around then.
I mean, historically, none of the walls have actually worked. So
And as I've said before, as a nurse, I am quite interested in all the DNA that has been done. And if you look at all the different ethnic groups across the world, you would find DNA from all different countries,
yeah, I mean,
different places,
I mean,
and different persons.
I mean, that's what I was describing in the beginning, that if you look at the DNA the way we have all originated in one place and then diverged all over different places in the world, and you can trace back all that DNA, and so most of us are more similar than different.
Yes.
And so based on that, you can see that why it is futile to even think about different ethnicities.
And why can't we try to understand that we can work with each other?
But that's where the greed and tribalism comes in, and me and mine and myself, all that takes over. I mean, that's the those are the problems, because I want to deal with myself first, and as long as I am satisfied, then I got to deal with my family, my tribe, and if that is happy, I don't care about anybody else. And
But-
that is what has happened actually throughout the world, and that's what I was giving the example of France. And when I was in France, I saw how the so-called, what they said is the Moors, they lived separate, and they, of course, they were also in town, but you looked at their housing, they were always in a separate place. And I wondered even at that time, how were they going to actually create a new France unless they consciously think of those other people also as French? And not only just because some of those other people are great soccer players, but as long as they are great soccer players, they are good. But what happens once they go back to their so-called ghetto? They are treated as other?
Yeah, which brings up an issue here in this country, and that is now they're talking about the wealthy and the poor and middle class, and that there are issues related to that is beginning to go around. And I really don't understand it as well, because we're Americans, whether we're poor or wealthy or whatever, but now we have that issue
By the way,
going around.
Donald Trump floated an idea a few months ago where he wanted to have the right to be able to declare individuals, if not groups, no longer Americans, even though they were born here. Forget the ones who were naturalized, the ones who were born here.
Yes.
There was this idea of other. And I think the other factor that we have to keep in mind is in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, life was pretty good. And most people did pretty well. And when you're doing well, in many cases, you're more willing to cut the other guy a break. But since that time, when things started to go south for a number of people, excuse the term, then you start looking for somebody to blame, and some of the old prejudices or stories suddenly become more important. The 1930s in Germany. Germany had, I'll use an example, in the early 1900s, a very vibrant Jewish community. And they were different, but they were accepted. You're the same but different, and things were going along. When, after World War I and things were horrible in Germany, suddenly you're looking for somebody to blame. Now, you could blame England or France, but you could blame somebody local to you. Hey, here's a community. If they didn't have this, then I would have it. If they were not talk a little different or look a little different, then we'd be all the same and things would be better. And we're doing the same thing today, primarily to the Muslim, or we're doing it to the Muslims now. It's the Mexicans. I'm sure.
Mostly what has happened is, if you can use a broader brush, it's kind of lumping all the brown people in one corner that way.
Yeah,
because it happens. Right. It happens, unfortunately. But actually, going back to your other idea, is that the idea is, in general, what has happened after the colonial rule collapsed. What happened is, gradually, most of the countries in the world began to prosper, and that not only opened newer markets, but also caused the the other effect in that the relative wealth, which was in comparison in different countries, began to become equalized. So naturally, what you see is that after 1950s, when life was good in America, it was not so good in China or India or Vietnam or other places. But then gradually they have improved. Naturally, it has become kind of, when you compare, naturally the life here is not that great in comparison.
Well,
that's what also
the relative.
It's relative.
Yeah. Since the what was it, 2008, when the whole world went through what amounted to a depression.
Yes.
It didn't last long enough, I guess, to be physically a depression, but it was damn close. The wealthy managed to survive and maintain, and everybody else who was living day to day could not save enough to take care of themselves and their kids and maybe become wealthy.
Yes.
And so instead of a middle class society, which we were in the 50s and 60s and 70s, we've now become a rich and a poor society, and the middle class is becoming decimated.
Yes.
And being forced to one area or there, primarily down. And they are now saying, hey, let's go back to the way things were,
Yes.
but they're not understanding why things are the way they are, so therefore their solutions very often are inappropriate.
Yes.
In the same way as building a symbol, and I think a big billboard with Donald Trump's face on it would be equally effective as a wall,
Yes.
because all of the problems we have are coming from not through the desert, but through ports of entry. As a matter of fact, interesting fact, the people who live on the border are violently against the wall.
Because they don't
Yes.
see it.
Well, no, A, they don't see the problem, and B, they want access to the river.
Access to the river, yes.
Yeah, so they can have
Yes.
their cattle
Yes.
get water.
Yes.
So it's the people who theoretically are less affected who see this problem and are reacting to it.
Now, I won't live to see it, and you probably won't live to see it
I'm going to live forever,
either.
so that
But the idea that we Americans are having fewer children, and when this becomes a problem, one will be running to all the other group to please have some children, and could I have these children? And that will be coming, or they will be running to marry someone from South America, someone from different places, because these are the people who would be having the children. And so
that's
we need to
conventional
think
wisdom,
about that.
but I don't think it's true.
No,
The world has changed. Automation has changed the dynamic totally. There aren't enough productive things for human beings to do, particularly in America. And so having less children is actually a very good idea.
You think so?
The automobile industry, and I was peripherally involved in this particular part of it, went from people actually manually putting things together to machines. The number of people working in the automobile industry has dropped exponentially. Everybody complains, well, it went to here or it went to there. The fact of the matter is, when they moved, they automated. There were so many less jobs in the new place than there were in the old place that nobody has work. They're getting to the point now, interestingly enough, I saw an article the other day, where picking crops, which is what the these Mexican or Latino immigrants do today, is becoming more and more automated. There won't be jobs for them when they come over. There won't be anything for them to do.
But I have been reading about the idea that we're having less children here in this country and some of the other countries. And pretty soon, people will start getting desperate because everything will be going down. And they will start looking for the poor and others to please come and have some children for us.
They did that in Germany, but no longer. They don't. We're doing what everybody always does. We're fighting the last war. We maybe short term need somebody to come in and do some work, but because of automation, less and less of it will be required. So you don't need to replace the same numbers of people that you had before. You're actually creating a problem of people sitting around idly, not having anything to do.
But again, to Margaret's point, there is that although you will need fewer people, what is eventually going to happen? The whole population is going to age, and that means to replace some workers, you do need newer people. And for that, I don't know what the solution is. Is the solution continue the way the immigration is happening, or is it just like what Japan is having right now? Japan has become an aged society, and they are facing problems just like Europe has problems. But at the same time, given that there is mechanization is advancing, will we need as many people as we need today? Probably not. But we still need newer infusion as we go. But at the same time, historically, you may need more younger people to bring in newer ideas, which are more technologically technologically more savvy. Because as we get older, we are getting older with the older technology. The younger generation is actually born as technologically native, and if you watch a little kid with the phone or iPad, I wonder where did they learn all that? They
learned it from their friends.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, but if we say they learned it from friends, where did the friend learn? I don't know that, because it looks like were they born with that, or is it because the overall smarts have increased, while as the older people are declining? What is happening? I don't know.
I personally think you show a kid anything.
Yes.
And they gradually start learning things on their own, particularly if their friends, the people that they associate with, are doing similar things, and maybe their parents showed them a different thing, and they share.
But
I agree with you. When I have a problem with my phone, I look for a 7-year-old.
Yes, and that's what they know right away what to do. And I wonder all the time, how did they do that? How do they do that? I don't know. But that's why that means as we become older, you do need newer generation with newer ideas.
Agreed.
Newer outlook, newer viewpoints.
In the same way as we've all had kids, when I was growing up, it seemed like every family had 3 or 4 kids. That was the standard. Now it's probably down closer to 2.
It's closer to 2 now.
And maybe we will begin to stabilize the next time is like 1.5 or 1 3/4, because we don't need to replace. And we're aging.
Yes.
But I'm almost 75. I can still do a lot of stuff that when I was growing up 50 years ago, a 75-year-old could not do.
Yes. Things are different.
Right. It's not like I have to. I'm not in a position yet where I need somebody to walk me around and wipe my ass.
But these aging,
soon, but not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
these aging people, have you noticed what has become a problem now? And that is sexuality, and people are going um, having sex and putting themselves on different people. And I don't know why that is,
Not following.
What is that? What are you really saying then?
meaning that they are having sex with young children, boys,
It always
in the
existed.
military, but more than ever, it seems.
I question.
maybe
I
it's
question
just
that piece.
You're questioning,
that
maybe
it's more than ever.
Maybe it's advertising. I don't know, but I hear it all the time.
We hear it more,
Right.
Because there's more. There are more outlets.
You don't think you think it's been going on?
Yes, I think humans have been around. I mean, you look at humans, you look at animals. It's part of
humans been
biology.
around, but
it's
I
part
haven't
of biology.
heard-
You have
I
not
haven't heard of this much all the time. You're hearing this.
Yes,
I remember when I was a kid, people were having sex.
yes.
And
They will always have sex.
Yeah.
Well, sex with your married people, but
No, there were an awful lot of people who had, quote, illegitimate children. There were an awful lot of abortions. When they invented the pill, was the beginning of the women's revolution, where the women could now control, could now work if they chose to work, as opposed to being home, being a mother, because one way or another that's what was going to happen. It's been that way.
Yes.
Go back to prehistory, when
Just read the Bible.
yeah,
Just read the Bible. You will know what
Okay,
was.
so say
people were
what-
going through and they were having a great old time. Not everybody was enjoying it, but at least some were having a great old time.
Well, sometimes they depict it as if they were not enjoying it, or they were being stoned. But that's a different issue.
Yeah.
But they were having it.
So it existed. It was happening.
So if it's a normal thing to do, how come we have so many people in the military getting thrown out and different places because of this sexuality?
Not clear that there's that many people being thrown out today, because they desperately need people in the military. So you got to do something really bad to get thrown out, I think. I don't know.
I mean, that's a policy issue.
Yeah.
That's a policy issue. I don't know what the policies are.
And not only the military, but here in this town, other towns, things are happening.
There has been all for time immemorial from the early days of primates, and probably go back to mammals and
When you go to all the animals,
yeah.
it's the same thing. It's the same story. It's a
the idea of mating
Yes.
and being semi-exclusive is some species
biology.
do and
It's
some
biology.
species don't.
it's biology.
Yeah.
And you look at those bonobo primates. You watch their videos and you wonder who taught all those. But that's called biology.
Yeah. And, every species figures out how they're going to continue. And
some not continue.
some on their own don't continue, and some have help.
Didn't you have in the was it the Malachites or the Pharisees who said that there should be no sex?
The early Christians.
No, but there was a tribe.
No, the Pharisees were the upper class in Palestine.
Who moved to the desert? I forgot the name actually. One of their things was that sex is evil, so it should not be.
Well, the early Christians believed that the world was going to end soon, and so sex was not necessary.
Okay, maybe that was the.
That attitude obviously changed, but the idea that sex was evil, I don't know where that came, but there's a number of certainly Protestant denominations who have that as a base.
Okay, see,
that sex is only necessary for procreation.
Okay.
And,
And then stop.
you know,
Now, I'm not saying sex is not appropriate. I'm saying it's appropriate if both persons agree to have sex together.
Right.
What is going on now is that other people are making someone have sex with them.
but that's what has been throughout history the norm. The idea of consensual being the norm is very, very recent in the history of land-based life.
So why are we going back to?
I'd like to think that we've progressed some, but we haven't necessarily progressed as far as we'd like to have done.
Well, there was a news item some time ago about how one of the methodologies in Kyrgyzstan or some place like that, one of the things they do is there is bride abduction. The groom abducts the bride and they get married. And I think it's in Kyrgyzstan or some place like that. But that's kind of a although now they say that now more and more people say maybe we shouldn't be doing that, but they still do it.
I still do it. I see.
Did you ever watch Braveheart, the movie?
No.
Well, according to them, and I've never confirmed it, the idea was that the lord, the noble who controlled a particular area, was to be the first to have relations with a bride.
Okay. Well, that might be true, but
that was law.
Yes.
That was the law.
But this is what I learned when I was in China. This is what my guide told me.
Okay.
She said that we talked about all this, and she said that what was interesting during the king's thing, the girl, her first first choice, or the king was the first groom, supposedly.
Well, that would be similar.
That is what you said about Braveheart. And then if he didn't choose her or if he didn't marry her, then everybody else was allowed. Other people were allowed.
Wow.
Otherwise, she would become the concubine.
Okay.
How about that? Now, see that I thought that was I said, does that happen now? She said, no. Now we don't do that. Of course, there's no king now.
Right.
But now everybody decides their own and all that, and that's different. Things have changed.
Yeah, but we look at some of we have this image of what life is supposed to be like. It's I'm a political science major from college, and I remember distinctly Thomas Hobbes.
Oh.
He started his primary book saying, "Life in nature is nasty, brutish, and short."
Wow.
And that's why you have civilization. Life in the past was nasty, brutish, and short. And with all the faults that American and Western and probably civilization throughout the world, it's better now
It's better
than it was
then. But is
2,000 years ago, or 5,000, or even 100 years
Even
ago.
100 years ago, actually.
100 years ago, but is it getting worse now with everything
It goes
going
up
on?
and down, and hopefully we will. Every time, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That old saw, it's real. Whenever you change something, when a conservative, if Paul were here, he would be saying, conservatives don't exist. But the philosophy of conservative is that take your time. When you're making a change, take your time. Look at what's likely to happen if you make this change before you go and do it. And the liberal would push ahead faster because the perceived advantages are so important. You do what you can, and if things don't work quite as well, you try again. You learn and try again.
Actually, I remember the scene in on the the, this I forgot the name of the movie now already. The Jewish movie with the guy
Fiddler.
Fiddler on the Roof.
Yeah.
Thank you, Fiddler on the Roof. I remember that scene that they're trying to get their daughter married to a butcher who is 200 years old butcher, and he has only one eye, and the parents are saying, "Oh, at least she will eat." And that reminds me all the time. That was life, just like where I grew up in. That was the attitude of the parents there too, about 100 years ago, and that they would marry a daughter into a family who had land, who was a landowner. Even if the landowner was 200 years old, at least she will eat. And that constantly reminds me how the life was. But at the same time, now things have changed. No girl is going to be willing to do that unless she chooses to do it herself. See, that's the difference.
Okay, because I was going to question.
Yes, because they do that actually. They say, well, my boyfriend is 60 years old. I'm only 27. It doesn't matter. But now the problem is parents are all upset. Why are you doing that? But that is the only way I'm going to get married.
Or maybe I want.